I've captured your attention with a grandiose promise of speaking the truth and saving the world, but we're both adults and I think we should drop the clickbait immediately so that we can have a realistic and grounded discussion of what it means to heal and individuate as a highly sensitive person. A few weeks ago, I released a video on this topic with the primary focus being the interplay of unresolved childhood trauma and insatiable spiritual hunger being the defining traits of the HSP healing journey. In essence, my conclusion from that video was twofold. Firstly, to identify with the HSP label and embrace the best traits, and secondly, to disidentify with the label when you realize that it's keeping you unnecessarily bound within a limited identity construct, sometimes a victim mentality, and it's holding you back from that full spectrum expression of your sensitive creative giftedness. This video is my part 2 extension to that very well received video, and it was difficult to try and imagine where I could take the conversation. So I tried to choose a question which would give us the greatest launchpad and hopefully provide the most value to the most people, and I chose this question from Beans on Toast, which is not only a very tasty black country, middle class, working class, middle of the country northern dish which I grew up on. Actually, it's probably about a quarter of my diet as a child growing up outside of Birmingham. It's the question of the day, and it's from Beans on Toast, which is a strange question to receive because I didn't know toast could be highly sensitive, but so we go. Beans on Toast asks me, do you think that you could talk more about the highly sensitive person's way of viewing and taking responsibility? I am myself an HSP who knew that Beans could identify as HSP, and my childhood has definitely affected how I handle responsibility. Sometimes it seems like there's no middle ground. Either I take on way too much, or I can't take on anything at all because I feel overwhelmed and become overstimulated. It's hard to balance it. And then goes on to say, thank you for talking about the videos. So thank you, Beans on Toast. I will drop the jokes right there and we will return to the serious responsibility of showing up as an adult in the adult world, because the number one thing that leapt out to me from this question, and seems to be one of the core underlying traumatic traits of most HSP people, are those words, overstimulated and overwhelmed. Typically, when we encounter these words within the context of high sensitivity, we think that it's naturally a byproduct that comes with the territory or the identity or the character traits of being an HSP person. But this doesn't need to be the case. The way that I first saw this question is actually a huge flashlight going off in my mind that this indicates an unhealed inner child, unresolved childhood trauma, because the child is a being of extremes. The child could never take responsibility in the adult world because it's never meant to. The child, the inner child in particular, is a creature which is often frozen in time. Of course, it's a psychological way of relating to our past, but truly, the number one invitation for any HSP who's genuinely seeking to make a meaningful and consistent, crucially, consistent contribution into the outer world is to do the inner child trauma work. So where do we begin? I've covered this video in many different forms and many different months on this channel, but once more I will hold up the book that I like holding up, John Bradshaw's Homecoming, the single best inner child book out there. You've probably seen it before, there's a reason for that. It takes you through the inner child healing process, with a key distinction being the understanding that there are many inner children. I'm going to come into a deeper clarification of why I think inner child work is the key to unlock that door of responsibility as an HSP. But John Bradshaw talks about the inner toddler, the inner child, young inner child from like age 4 to age 8, the kind of prepubescent child, and the inner adolescent, and how to work with each of them to integrate through a parts work based dialogue, which of course you'll need an understanding of parts work, so I recommend you read Embracing Ourselves by Hal and Sidra Stone. This is the voice dialogue process. Super simple, you don't need to go into the Jungian active imagination realms to get the most out of that self-hypnotic, self-actualizing kind of inner work. But this isn't where I want to take this video. They're not new ideas, but this is an idea which I don't hear spoken about very often. Forgive me for holding up this book, because it's from 1993, and I think this book wins the award for the single worst book cover that I have ever seen. Brace yourself. How dreadful is that? Absolutely awful. The book itself as well isn't written that well, but the idea of the dark side of the inner child is where I want to take this video, and I'm going to bring out a quote that indicates what happens when we ignore the fact that the inner child may not be love, light, and possibility, but actually could be quite self-limiting, especially when it comes to sensitivity and the trance-like nature of being an unhealed young person on the planet, which lives inside of the adult, but we'll get into that. So a quote from the book. Let's try and find it and see if I've got it. Here we go. Talking about selective trances. Wonderful quote. It will frame the rest of the conversation. You'll see why I'm bringing this up as my answer to the question. The inner child sees past time, imagining it is present time, thus illusions. Seeing things now that were then, that were there then. It's really badly written, I apologize, but the idea is worth going into. In this way, the inner child within the adult reads into things now, things that were said then, feels things now that were felt then but are not actually happening now, or hears things now that were said then. It's honestly really badly. I don't even want to read the rest of this quote. I actually got to the end of this book, and what did I write? Around the margins. Yeah, there we go. Don't know if you can see that right there. Yeah, I wrote, what shit writing. It's such a good idea. This book, don't buy it, don't buy the book. The point of bringing this into the conversation, the trance-like nature of the unhealed inner child who is frozen in time, frozen in the past, and actually overlays into the present in an unskillful way. The reason that many highly sensitive people feel overwhelmed and overstimulated is because they aren't fully grown up into their mature adult psyche. The Holonic idea of consciousness, or the Holonic theory of consciousness, is about nested parts or nested psychic structures. Imagine that the baby is like this, the toddler, the child, the adolescent, the adult, and then the mature adult. As we go through life, we develop into wider spheres of awareness. That's called the Holonic theory of consciousness. Ken Wilber talks about this in great detail within his integral theory. We don't need to go into all of that for the sake of this video. What I do want to draw your attention towards is the potential wire crossing or imbalance that might be happening inside of you when it comes to being the adult, or identifying yourself as the adult, but actually being run by the scared inner child who is particularly sensitive during their childhood. This is the little girl who didn't want to go to the party because everyone was way too loud and there was way too much going on, or the little boy who only wanted to wear very particular things because the fabric was very irritating and it never felt good on the skin, or certain expressions were way too intense for either the little boy or the little girl. We still remember these things as adults, but very rarely is all of that inner child energy unfrozen and released and integrated in a way where we retain the sensitivity as an adult without unskillfully remaining as frozen and as helpless and hypnotized by the sensitivity of an 8-year-old. What does it mean to have sensitivity of an 8-year-old as a 30 or 40-year-old? Well, it's going to mean something like an immature and juvenile response to the responsibilities that are presented to you. It's not to get on anyone's case. I really am trying to present, hopefully, a good avenue for psychological self-healing, because unlocking and unburdening and freezing the inner child in a way where, well, unfreezing the inner child. To unfreeze the inner child means to heat up the rest of the possibilities that lay ahead. It's language getting way too complex. The point is that overwhelm and overstimulation is a child's problem, not an adult's problem. It doesn't mean that adults can't be overstimulated. It doesn't mean that anxiety isn't a thing. I'm not saying that in the slightest. But in terms of being way too overcommitted and way too undercommitted, of operating in extremes in the world and saying yes when you mean no or no when you mean yes, and being confused where the boundaries may be, that indicates a more underdeveloped way of approaching the world, which could mean that a little bit too much of your psyche is being taken control by a younger, scared part Ultimately, it's inner child work mixed with the growing up and the showing up of the adult world, but there is such a thing as being the sensitive adult who maintains the best of their childhood but doesn't get trapped in the lower traumatic cycles which we don't need to hold on to anymore. This is the little girl who doesn't want to go to the party because it's way too much, who becomes the woman who chooses not to go to the party because she has things that are better to do and the better use of her creative time, but she could if she wanted to. Or the little boy who didn't like the certain fabrics and through their maturity as an adult develops a clothing design company that has incredible sensitivity to the types of materials that would feel good on the body and could make millions by genuinely serving something powerful into the world that only they could be aware of. Or the same with the creative, highly sensitive child who dreams and paints and creates. As an adult, they get to be that plus the entrepreneurial element that would present themselves into the world in a way where they could be seen and they could be appreciated and make a tangible impact on their community. Ultimately, beans on toast, how do you move forwards? Well, I recommend you do the inner child work. I recommend that everyone does the inner child work, but highly sensitive people in particular, it's about unfreezing the traumatized inner child and dehypnotizing yourself from the very mystical, oftentimes very safe mystical escapism that comes through when we're people, young people, in a very overstimulating environment. If you want to learn how to do this, well, the next episode in the video, my voice is all over the place. The next episode and the next video is on spiritual narcissism, and it's pretty hard to look at this, but it's well worth doing because you can't escape that higher level transpersonal self-integration, so join me over there.